Today we're looking at refresh token rotation and how it can level up the JWT authentication and security of your REST API. Hello and welcome. Hi, I'm Dave. We're going to add refresh token rotation and reuse detection to the Node.js REST API that's built in my Node.js for Beginners course. You could consider this tutorial an extra bonus chapter for that course. And if you haven't completed that Node.js Beginners course, you might consider doing that first. It will really help you understand the starter code and what we're doing today. I'll share links to all resources and source code in the description. Let's get started. Refresh token rotation is a change in strategy from the standard refresh token approach. Let's quickly review. With JWT authentication, an access token and a refresh token are issued after a successful login. An access token lasts for a short amount of time, think minutes here, not hours, and a refresh token lasts for a longer amount of time, possibly 1 or more days. The access token is sent back as JSON data, and a front-end app should store it in memory, but not in local storage or a cookie. The refresh token is sent to the browser as an HTTP-only secure cookie. It's not accessible by JavaScript, but it does need to have an expiration set. Every time the API is accessed, the access token is sent with the request. When the access token expires, the refresh token is used to request a new access token. The refresh token is verified with its own endpoint and compared to data in the database. It needs to expire or be removed during a manual logout. But what if the refresh token was compromised? Malicious access would be granted until the refresh token expires. And this brings us back to refresh token rotation. With refresh token rotation, every time a new access token is issued, a new refresh token is also issued. This doesn't eliminate the risk, but it does greatly reduce it. It's even more effective when combined with reuse detection. This will allow a refresh token to be used only once. After it is used, it will be invalidated. And if token reuse is attempted, all refresh tokens for the user will be deleted, which then requires the user to log in again as soon as their access token expires. Okay, I've got Visual Studio Code open here with the starter code, and this is the full API that was built in my Node.js for Beginners course. If you don't understand everything you see here, I recommend you go there first. Okay, looking at this code, we're only going to change 4 files today. We're going to implement refresh token rotation, refresh token reuse detection, and one other request I've had is to make this backend API support more than one device or more than one login at a time. That's fairly easy to do, so we'll add that as we go as well. And we'll start in the model directory under the user model. So here we're just going to change this refresh token data type from string to an array that holds string data. And we can do that by wrapping this string declaration in an array. And then we can save the model file and we're finished with that. That's all we need to do. Now, if you have existing users already in your MongoDB store here for data, you may want to change that because now we're going to start handling this refresh token data as an array when we change our code. And so if I expand this, you can see here, I now have an array with a refresh token in there. If you need to change it, click the edit button there, and you can of course scroll down to your data. You can see I've got an array now that holds a string rather than just having a string. And you can change this once you get into your MongoDB. Okay, I'm going to cancel that change and go back to Visual Studio Code. And with Visual Studio Code now back open, we're finished with the user model change, and we can go to the controllers directory. The other 3 files that we'll change today are all in here. I'm going to double click on them to open each one and keep them open. So there's the Auth Controller, the Logout Controller, and the refresh token controller. Now that I've got all of those open, I'm going to press Control B in Visual Studio Code to hide the file tree. Gives us a little more room to see our code. Now we just need to think our logic through. We're making changes to the code and not writing it from scratch. And so a lot of what we have will stay. And the first thing is we receive our refresh token from that cookie that we send to the client, which is the browser. And here we say if there is no cookie, we just send an unauthorized. And we want to continue to do that. And we also want to get the refresh token from the cookies.jwt if it does exist, and then we get that data. However, now we want to delete the cookie after we receive it because we're going to be sending a new cookie. So we need to do that. We're already doing that in the Logout Controller. So that's fairly easy to go to the Logout Controller, copy the line of code that says clear cookie when we send that response, just Control-C to copy, and go back to the refresh token controller and add a line underneath and just delete the cookie right there after we get the data out of it. Now the next line we have where we search for the user that has the refresh token we've received, we need to keep that just the way it is. And that's one very nice thing about using Mongoose with MongoDB. We just use find one like we did with the string data, even though it's an array, and we're still searching for that refresh token within the refresh token array that we now have. So we don't have to change that code at all. This next line we are going to change because this says if we did not find a user, but we did receive the refresh token. So that means that refresh token does not exist anymore and it's already been used and deleted. So this is now a reuse detection situation. So here let's put detected refresh token reuse, and I need to spell reuse correctly. There we go. So now we want to handle this code differently. So instead of just the return with the 403, which is a forbidden response, we want to put a little more code in here. We want to decode the token that we received to see if we can pull out a username and match that to an account where we could delete all of the refresh tokens that exist with that account. So that's going to be much like we evaluate the refresh token here when we have found one that we want to use. So I'm just going to copy this starting at jwt.verify, go all the way down here to the error decoded function that starts, and press Control-C. So now inside of our if statement, when we haven't found a user, I'm going to put that same thing. I'm going to close out the function and then also close out the JWT verify here on line 20. Now this needs to be an async function at this point because we're going to access a database inside of here. Now we receive an error from this function if we cannot decode the refresh token. Essentially, that means it's expired. It's just no longer valid. And so we don't need to worry about that so much. So we can just say if we have an error, then we can go ahead and return that same 403 that we would down here too. So I'll just copy this same line and paste it right after that. Otherwise, we know somebody is attempting to use a refresh token that would be valid if we hadn't invalidated it already because it was used before. So with our refresh token rotation, we're able to invalidate a token, and that lets us know that, okay, this attempt is a reuse attempt and we don't want that. So we'll call this hacked user now. So we're defining a hacked user variable, and we're just going to find the user here that has been hacked. So we'll say await and then user find one. And now inside of this, we're going to look for the username that we get from decoded.username. We need to also remember to put the exec here so we can execute that call right at the end. And then after we search for that hacked user, hopefully we get the hacked user. And now we're going to say refresh token. And this is the data that we have in an array. This is no longer a string. We're just going to set it equal to an empty array. So that deletes all the refresh tokens. And there would be a refresh token in there for each device that the user has logged in. So if we detect reuse, we're going to make the user log in again as soon as their access token expires. And we aren't in this tutorial. However, if you wanted to go back and put in all the code to actually save the access tokens to the database and check those against the database every time, which would be a lot, then you could actually empty that out as well, and it would force an immediate login the next time they attempted to request anything from the API. So it would be a lot more work, a lot more data transactions, but it would also log out that user just a little faster. And again, we won't be implementing that today, but this is showing you how refresh token rotation works, and that's much more common. So here, let's go ahead and say result, and once we have a result, we're going to save these changes. So we'll say await hacked user, and then call save, and then we can go ahead and log this if we want to see what the result was as well. Okay, and if those changes are saved, we've essentially detected any kind of token reuse. Now up here above, a reminder that if we don't get a cookie at all, meaning if a request is sent to this endpoint that doesn't have a refresh token or a cookie at all, then we send a 401 unauthorized. So this code is only enacted essentially if we did get a cookie, but we did not find a user that was linked to this refresh token inside the cookie. And that means the refresh token has already been invalidated. And by invalidated in our setup, that means removed from that refresh token array in the database. And if that refresh token has expired as well, then we just send the 403 forbidden, because we're going to get the error from this function that verifies the token. However, if it's still a valid token and someone is attempting to reuse it, then we know we have an issue. We find that username that we have saved in the refresh token previously, and once we know what user to look up and invalidate their tokens, we of course remove all the tokens and set that refresh token array to an empty array. So that's what we have here. Now let's move on to where we have found the token, it's a valid token, and we're ready to reissue a new one, but of course we still need to remove the old token from that refresh token array in the database. So here we want to say const new refresh token array. Kind of a long name, but it is very descriptive. We'll say found user, and then we'll call that refresh token array data, and we can use array methods on this array that's in our database. So here we'll say filter. Now for each refresh token, and I'll just put RT for refresh token, we're going to compare the refresh token and make sure it is not equal to the refresh token that we received, which is essentially the old refresh token at this point. So we're filtering out the old refresh token and creating a new array here without it. Okay, I'll save that, and now let's make some changes to the existing code we had when we had a successful or valid refresh token that was sent to us. And we of course want to leave much of this the way it is. We are going to access the database again with await, so we need to make this an async function now inside of the JWT.verify. The rest of the beginning here stays the same, but right after we start the function, we want to do something else if we also have an error. So we've received the token, but at the same time the token has expired. We found the user it was related to. All of that is good, but we have an expired token that is being replaced. So at this point we need to update our data in the database. We're going to say found user dot refresh token. We're going to set that equal to, and I'm just going to create a new array here and then spread in that new refresh token array. And I'm in the habit of creating new arrays when I set data like this, and much of that is from React as well, but I just don't want to modify or change anything else. So this is kind of a pure functional habit of mine. If you're wondering why I didn't just set it equal to the new refresh token array. And once we make that change, of course, we need to save it. So we'll define result here, and we'll set this to await found user and call save as well. So that will update the database. And now, after that, a 403 is still sent. So we know, okay, at this point, we found the user, we had a refresh token, but it was an old one. And so now, this is what would happen, of course, when that refresh token has expired. But now at this point, we can say the refresh token was still valid, and we had a valid user to go with it. Everything is good there. So now we're going to send back the roles, the access token, which, by the way, we're putting the roles in the access token, and this is something to note if you completed the React login series with me. We also sent the roles here in the JSON by themselves, and that was quick and easy to do, and we didn't have to decode them. But if you want, you could eliminate sending the roles here, just send the access token, because we're putting the roles in the access token here, but you would need like JWT decode or another library that's similar to decode that JWT on the front end if you were going to pull the roles out, and that might be a good way to do that. Okay, back to the topic at hand. We're going to create an access token, but we're also going to create a refresh token here because a new one is going to be sent every time we send that new access token as well. So we're already doing this in the Auth Controller. Let's jump over, and instead of recreating new code, let's just take code that we already have in the Auth Controller. So I'm copying everything here from line 26 to 33, and I'm going to press Control-C to copy. We'll go back to the refresh token controller and I'll paste this in. But now let's change, just because we already have refresh token defined. So we need to turn this into new refresh token that we're creating here. And that makes a little more sense. It's descriptive. And then we need to change how we save this as well, because before we were just saving a string here. So this found user.refresh token is the data going back to the database once again. So let's spread in our new refresh token array that we created, and then let's also add in the new refresh token that we just created. And now if we save that, we're not quite finished yet, because after that we want to send a cookie back as well. And we were also doing that in the Auth Controller. After we created that refresh token, we can copy this line where we have a response.cookie, and we're sending back an HTTP only secure cookie, as we see right here. So Control-C to copy that back to the refresh controller, and right underneath here I'm going to paste in that code we just copied and save to get a little better formatting. But we also need to make a change here or we're going to have a problem, because we renamed this. This is new refresh token now that we are sending inside the cookie. There we go. And everything else here should be good, and we should now be finished with the refresh token controller. So we are rotating the tokens, we're deleting the old one, we're sending a new one. We're also detecting if there is any attempted reuse above. And that's really what we wanted to handle. And of course, we're also working with multiple devices now because we have an array, so we could have more than one refresh token. It's going to be one refresh token per device that is rotated. Okay, now that we're finished with the refresh token controller, we're going to head over to the Logout Controller. But first, I just want to copy this code right here that says found user.refresh token.filter, because we're going to need that. So Control-C to copy, and heading over to the Logout Controller. Okay, not many changes to make here at all. As a matter of fact, we're going to start out the same, and we'll scroll down to where we have delete refresh token in database, because once again, we're not dealing with a string, we're dealing with array data. So instead of this string here, we're going to set the database found user.refresh token array equal to this filter, and we'll just set it directly here. We're only using it in this one spot, so there's no need to create a variable. We'll just filter the array right here, which returns a new array. And we can save this change. And now let's go ahead and move over to the Auth Controller. Okay, let's scroll to the top of the Auth Controller. Most of the changes will be below, but one thing we want to do right at the beginning is define cookies here, because there could be an existing cookie. So we want to look at the request.cookies and go ahead and grab it if it does exist there. Okay, after that I'm going to press Alt-Z just so some of the code that is scrolling off the screen can just wrap down to the next line. And we don't need to make any other changes here until we get down to where we're creating this new refresh token that we're going to send. So that is one thing we want to do right there. Let's select refresh token, and we'll go ahead. I don't want to select all instances of it because it's being used in different context in a few places here. So we'll just say new refresh token. I'll copy this, and we also want to make sure that is what we send in the cookie. So that will be the new refresh token that is being sent. Now let's create some room under where this new refresh token is created. And I'll scroll up to give us a little bit more room as well. And we want to say we're going to have a new array. So let's say const new refresh token array. And I'm going to go ahead and use a ternary statement here. I know not everybody likes these, but it's not going to be a chained ternary, so you might not hate it too much. This means if we don't have any cookies with the JWT, so we're checking to see if we do not. And if that is true on this line, I'm going to just say found user dot refresh token. And that means this new refresh token array is going to be equal to what was in the database already. There were no cookies, no old refresh token to delete out of the database, essentially. But if there is a cookie with a JWT, then we want to remove it from the database. So here we can say found user dot refresh token dot filter, and once again we can take that refresh token, each refresh token actually, and compare it to what we're receiving from cookies.jwt, which is essentially the old refresh token, but we've never defined that above. Okay, then also if we have a cookie, an old cookie, we want to remove it. So now let's say if cookies.jwt once again, let's just jump over here and grab that clear cookie line that we have inside of the Logout controller. So I'm copying that with Control-C, jump back to the Auth controller, and we can put it right here. So if we received a cookie at the Auth controller, we're going to go ahead and delete it now at this point. Now once again we need to change what we are saving into the database. So let's change this found user.refresh token to this new array. So we'll say new refresh token array is being spread in here. And now we also need to include that new refresh token that was created with a successful login. And after that, we should be finished with the Auth controller as well. Everything looks pretty good here. So I believe it is time to fire this up in our dev environment and test it out. I have Visual Studio Code here on the left with our Node REST API, and on the right I have a React app with a login that will interact with our REST API. So I'm going to press Control and the backtick, and then I'm going to type npm run dev to go ahead and start the REST API so we can interact with it and test those different endpoints. And the first endpoint we're going to test is the logout endpoint, which I'll of course have to log in for that first. So I'm going to type in Jane and I'll enter her password, and hopefully the server will go ahead and start here in just a second. And now it's up and running. I'm going to press sign in and we'll see what we get back. So we went ahead and hit the auth endpoint with post, and you can see Jane got assigned a refresh token right here. So that's what we expect. Now, because of the log statements that we have, let's go ahead and check the log out, where we, after we save the user here with result and then await found user.save, and we log the result, we'll know what goes to the database because that's the response, is the result here. So let's go ahead and look at the terminal again and see what response we get when we sign out. We sign out and you can see Jane's refresh token array is now an empty array. So that's what we want for the logout. The second possibility we want to test is having an old cookie, an old token essentially, in our browser when we go to the login. So let's go to the Auth controller. And after we get the cookies, I'm just going to paste in a console log statement here, and this will say cookie available at login, and we'll just use JSON stringify to look at that cookie in the terminal. But that means we have a cookie when we attempt to log in. It could have an old token though, and that's what we want it to have. So let's make sure we're going to let that token expire quickly. Let's see what we have here. Right now it says 1 day. So let's change this to like 15 seconds, which makes it just a little longer than the access token. And after we log in, we'll let that expire, but then we'll go back to the login without logging out. And that's how we could possibly still have a cookie, because it wouldn't have been deleted by manually logging out. So let's go to the login, and oh yeah, we want to go ahead and show the terminal again so we see that result. So we'll bring that back up. Okay, we're at the login. We'll log Jane back in. She's logged in. Now right now she didn't have a cookie. So you can see here in the terminal it says cookie available at login, and it's an empty object. But now she was assigned one, and we see what refresh token was sent in that cookie as well. So now we'll let this expire here over the 15 seconds that I'm talking, and then we'll just go back to the login without signing out. So we have a user that didn't sign out, but they go back to the login page, which is a possibility. You could, of course, adjust your front-end app to let that not be the case, but as a back-end developer, we don't know what the front end might do, so we want to handle this case. So now let's go to the login, and we'll log Jane in again, and it will identify that she had an old token, and there it is, cookie available at auth, and we can see the JWT cookie right here. And we wanted to make sure that was handled. Now she was assigned a new refresh token as expected, and she only has the one refresh token now. So yes, the old one was deleted and it identified that there was a new one. So our code is working for that as well. Now we want to check our code for an expired refresh token, and this would be in the refresh controller. So let's make sure we have that code pulled up. I'll hide the file tree once again. And now this is the typical code that we would see, or the typical action or process that we would see, and we already had this, so we just kind of want to make sure our code didn't change and make this process not work. So what we have here is, as we scroll down into the refresh token controller, is where we know we have a good token and we're evaluating everything. And we put in this new if statement. So yes, if we find an expired token, then we're going to go ahead and update. Here I'll press Alt-Z so we can see all the code. We're going to update with the new refresh token array that took the old token out. So we just want to make sure the old token is removed, and we'll have this result here. So let's do a couple of things. I'm going to paste in a console log statement here that says, yes, we've identified an expired refresh token. And then let's go ahead and console log that result as well, so we know what the database gets after that expired refresh token is identified. Okay, we'll pull the terminal back up. It's restarting due to our changes. Okay, looks like it's almost ready. I'm going to sign out. Maybe the server hadn't started yet. It's taking just a moment here. And now the server is up and running. We'll log in. It might identify an old cookie if the logout wasn't in place when I signed out. So let's see. Yes, we had an old cookie. Okay, that's going to be deleted. So it was as if I didn't sign out because the server wasn't running when I clicked sign out. But now we are logged in and we have a new refresh token. Let's let this token expire, and it will take 15 seconds to do that, and then it will identify that it is an expired token and handle it appropriately as well. So now let's go ahead and go to the admin page. It's probably been 15 seconds, and it will identify we have an expired token. And yes, that's what we have here. So we have expired refresh token. It identified that it was expired, and then our refresh token array is now emptied out. So it deleted the old refresh token from the array, and we were sent back to log in, and that's what we want. Okay, and while we're in the refresh token, what we really want to check now is for refresh token detection, or reuse detection actually. So we need to scroll back up here where we were detecting that, and let's go ahead and put that right before we save the hacked user here. So I'll put in a console statement, and we see attempted refresh token reuse. So we will catch that in this process here. And we are logging the result as well, so we'll still see what goes to the database in Mongo. Okay, we'll save this change, and the server will need to restart once again. And with the server restarted, we're going to not only need to use our React app, but we're going to use Postman for this as well, because we need two different sources to try to use the same token. So first, we'll log Jane in here. And actually, I want to go back and make this refresh token last longer now. I'm going to need longer than 15 seconds to make this happen. So back in the Auth Controller, when Jane logs in, let's switch this back to 1 day, which would be much more normal operation here. So now I'll expand this, and we'll let the server restart again, and then we'll get Jane logged in. The server is restarted. I'm clicking sign in for Jane, and now she is logged in, and we have a refresh token. And we went straight to the admin page because that's where she was before. That's fine. I want to go ahead and take Chrome and expand it to the full window right now. And then I want to open DevTools. I'm pressing Control-Shift and I to do that. You could also right-click and choose Inspect, but our DevTools should open. We want to go to the Application tab, and then in the Application tab, you want to find the cookies, and then we'll be on localhost 3000. And this is our secure cookie. It's not available through JavaScript, but one of these columns says secure. I believe the one with S and the check mark here. It is a secure cookie, but we can read this JWT, the refresh token, right here inside of DevTools. So we'll go ahead and grab this. Now Jane hasn't used this yet, but let's go ahead and have her use this refresh token. And now we've got the users and the admin page. She's got a new token. You can see it changed now. And so the token we had was different than this already. Let's go pull up Postman now and attempt to reuse the previous token. And there's Postman. And we can add a cookie. Notice I've already got the localhost 3500 and the refresh endpoint here. We can add a cookie to Postman over here on the right. And I'm going to delete the existing one, add a cookie, and instead of cookie1 equals value, we'll put JWT equals, and we'll paste in the refresh token that we had, that Jane already used. We save this, close this out, and attempt to use the previously used refresh token. I'll send it, and we should get a forbidden response back in the response here. And yes, that is what we got from the API. So that responds appropriately. Now this could also go the other way. A hacker could somehow get that refresh token before Jane uses it, maybe inside that 15-minute window before the access token expires. And at that point, a hacker could actually get an access token for that limited time frame. But of course, they couldn't reuse the refresh token either, so they would only have access before that access token expired. So instead of the 1 day duration of the refresh token, we've mitigated that down to possibly 15 minutes or less. So it's a great improvement. Okay, I'm going to close Postman now, and the final thing we want to check is just multi-device support. I'm also going to close DevTools, and I can resize Chrome back over here to the right side of the screen. But what we want to check now is to see if we have multi-device support. So let's sign Jane out. We hit the logout endpoint. That's all good. And now let's go log back in and get Jane a new token here. And now I'm going to open up Firefox and do a second login. You can see Jane only has one refresh token right now, but when I log into Firefox, it's actually simulating having another device, essentially two browsers or two different devices, either way. I have the Firefox browser off screen, but I'm logging in Jane right now, and then we should see the response from the API, and we do. And now the refresh token array has two separate refresh tokens in here, one for each device that is logged in, or in this case, each browser. But that's what we expect, and it will still rotate these tokens, delete the old one that is on whichever browser appropriate or whichever device, and then, of course, assign a new one. So this does now have multi-device support as well. And remember, if you're interested in building your own React login, like I have over here on the right, I have a series about that. And so I'll make sure to put a link to the React login tutorial series in the description below. Okay, a last-minute addition here. Sometimes it's good when I have an extra day or two to think about a tutorial and the code that I've created, and there's no shame in refactoring code or adding code when you realize there's something you left out or something you need to change. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. We're in the Auth Controller, and I thought of one other possible scenario, and it would be kind of a fringe case, but it could happen, so we want to think about this. Let's start out on line 35, where we were defining the new refresh token array. Just use the let keyword here instead of the const keyword, so we can reassign this if we want to. The rest of this ternary statement stays the same. But then after that, we had an if statement, and we were just saying if we had the JWT cookie, then we were clearing the cookie. But really, we need to add reuse detection here in the auth controller. And let me quickly go over this scenario. So we have a user, and the user logs in but never uses the refresh token and does not log out, so that refresh token is not removed. And then the refresh token is stolen. And if 1 and 2 are true, then we need to use reuse detection right here to clear all of the refresh tokens. So when the user logs back in, it would find that that was actually reused because the token wouldn't be there. So that's what we're going to do here. So we just grab the token from the cookies.jwt. We search for that token, and basically if we don't find the token, we know it's already been used then, because our user would not have used that token, so it should still be in the array, even if it's expired. And then it would get detected in another way like we previously were. However, if they have not used their token but it's not in there, then we know somebody else has used it. So here we log attempted refresh token reuse at login, and that lets us set this new refresh token array to empty. After that, everything else is still the same as it was before, but I just wanted to add this last minute addition because I felt like it was important to the tutorial and the thought process overall. Remember to keep striving for progress over perfection, and a little progress every day will go a very long way. Please give this video a like if it's helped you, and thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.